Well, I'm here with a good friend of mine. He's Professor Duane Armitage of the University of Scranton, which is a private university. He's a professor of philosophy, and he's a go-to guy for a lot of things relevant to our time, being able to bring philosophy to the average person, including children now. Do you have that book that you were just showing me there?
Yeah, right there.
Big Ideas for Little Philosophers. Is that out? Is that out now?
Yeah, that's out. So we got Descartes, Socrates, Simone de Beauvoir, and Aristotle. And this
Very
is a
good.
box set. You can get it on Amazon.
Very good. And that was, and that got a big promo in the New York Times, right?
Yeah, the New York Times gift guide for Christmas.
There you go. So it's state media approved.
I think so. I don't know.
From my perspective, that's my perspective.
Oh,
anyways, so I'm glad to have glad to have you on. It's been a while since we did a interview together. I guess over a year, maybe
yeah,
a year
2
and a
years
half.
almost.
Yeah. Last time we talked, we had a radio discussion where we talked about Soren Kierkegaard and Rene Girard and things we can learn, and those folks are all about helping us see the madness of crowds. And boy, has that timely, right?
Yeah.
This year, the time in between our interview and where we're at now, it's all about the madness of crowds,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So, I mean, just I'm trying to think where to begin. There's so much. This is why it's hard to talk about Rene Girard and stuff. It's like we're swimming in his fishbowl.
Well,
And
yeah. What I was thinking, I've gotten more into Girard and particularly Nietzsche lately. And I just cannot, I've talked about this last time we spoke about what postmodernism is and what Nietzsche was talking about with the death of God. And Nietzsche predicted this stuff over 150 years ago, that it would get like this, that you'd have the Christian ethic. And Girard says this, the Christian ethic of concern for victims detached from its metaphysics and now run riot and weaponized. And that's exactly what's going on. And it's exactly why I think the problems with the left and the right are seemingly so different, but they're the same. The left has sort of inoculated itself from any criticism, though, because they use that Christian ethic that's just catechized in us from 2,000 years of catechesis in Judeo-Christianity, namely that we should care about the poor, the orphan, the widow, the weak. And that's what social justice is. But social justice now has taken on this violence to it in a way. But no one dare criticize it because it's got that inoculation of Christianity, I think. And most people don't even realize it's a Christian virtue. And you see that in Nietzsche right through to Girard.
Right.
And so Girard, yeah.
So how do we, everybody keeps talking. I was just reading John McWhorter, from Columbia University, and he did a Substack piece where he was talking about how anti-racism is this new religion that's very aggressive, very dogmatic. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's a new religion in the sense that this is just the breakdown of older forms of political theology, political religions that are now kind of broken down so much that we can see the religiosity in the newest forms of political ideology, like wokeism. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like we were swimming in political religion, but we couldn't see it. And now, because they're breaking down, because we're not able to be bound together by the common myths of classical, state, social contract, themes, because they're not binding us together, because we can't even unite around the flag anymore. In the 80s, we had racial tension and gender tension, but we still united around the flag, by and large. But now the mainstream is so broken in its mythic consensus that the latest iterations of political ideology are patently and brazenly religious to our eyes. You see that?
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting is Martin Luther King's idea of the beloved community. Overnight, it seems like, and I didn't get the memo or anything, but like the idea of beloved community where we all sit together and we look past color and color blindness and all that stuff, it became sort of overnight that, that's naive to think that. Then the next day it became, it's not only naive, you're a racist if you think it, which I don't understand the logic of that. And I feel like that position is just, pushed, and no one's given an explanation for why they made that jump to, not only is it naive, but it's also racist to hold the idea that we can have something like a beloved community, But you're also right too, and when I agreed with you about, or the Columbia professor who said this is a religious movement. It plays on the religious instincts, I think. And so, who's the guy? Jonathan Haidt has a book called the Righteous Mind, and he talks about the switches that sort of get activated when people get together. And it's a religious switch. It probably, no doubt, goes back to prehistory when people would get together in crowds and do religious, festivals and things like this. It's just that instinct doesn't go away in us. So we just find, when, like you were saying, the state religion dies or whatever, the latest God dies in the Nietzschean sense, those instincts still seek out ways of expression in the Freudian sense, really. It's got to get out. We have this religious impulse that I think is exactly what's going on now in politics. It's a religion.
See, I would say political correctness is to mainline churches in America what McWokeism, which is what I call woke ideology, what wokeism is to the fundamentalists, right? And see, it's like when your caffeine is not strong enough in the mainline denominations, you got to go back to that good old time religion. You got to get that firebrand, dogmatic, aggressive, strident version of the good stuff. And that's where you're seeing this breakdown with these Methodist and Presbyterians and Anglican churches. That's not going to cut it. We need that good old time religion. And that's why you're seeing this transition at the same time from political correctness, which was the colorblind ideology.
Yeah.
Right? The Pepsi Cola, or what's the Coca-Cola ad or whatever about, I'd like to buy the world a Coke. This whole idea that this universal brotherhood, that's the original modernist approach. And now it's like, no, that's not cutting it. Let's go for that good old time fundamentalism where we can start canceling people. So we're going to throw away the quest for equality and go straight to equity, which involves coercion. Let's just get the coercion going. That's what they want.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
But you know what's interesting? What the good news about that is that it's a sign that they're losing. Because the fundamentalist layer is always a sign that there's a desperate grasping of power.
Right? That's right. Yeah, and it doesn't last very long. Most people I know who've had they've had experiences with fundamentalism, and it doesn't last long. It goes a couple of years, if that. I had a fundamentalist streak which lasted about 6 months or something when I was 17. But it's interesting to think about.
Was it summer camp?
No, it was just my own.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it's interesting. What if you think they're losing? What's going to happen in the next year or two? Because this cannot sustain itself. It's starting to eat itself already, and you can't imagine the country being like this, and leftism having the kind of power it does for much longer without it just breaking down. Because its nature is to seek out new victims and new victimizers to.
But that's why they need. This is the big thing that I keep going back to, my friends who want to do a lot of political activism, and they want to elect people and shape policy. I'm not interested in that, because it's okay. To me, it's like, I don't like government education, right? So when I hear people say, hey, I'm going to be a public school teacher so I can do some good from the inside, I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's not my thing. You go do that. You have fun with that. That's cool. Maybe you can do some good with that. Maybe, you'll be able to undermine the system and give people some good education in the midst of a sea of amorphous blob education that the government school system provides. But in the meantime, the big picture is getting people to exit these failing institutions. And that includes politics for me too. But I understand that people still want to play that game and, we're going to elect this senator, and that's fine. Go ahead. That's fine. But it's ultimately like saying, well, we're going to reform the public school system by putting in good, virtuous school teachers from within. It's just it's a losing game. It can help. Yeah. You can pull people out of the Titanic here and there doing that, but ultimately, the institution has got to just be exited, and that's why I have a problem with. It's almost like the McWoke left. They need a mirror double to maintain their existence, right?
Yeah.
They need the scapegoat. They need the right trying to mimic them and grasping for central command power. Because the moment we turn the other cheek, they have nothing to do but fall on their face.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And that's the irresistible trap of the mimetic rivalry, right? Is that we're just drawn to fight them instead of just let them fall. Social Aikido.
Yep.
Let them fall on their own face. Let them initiate violence and let them just punch their own head because we duck and they just, like a freaking the Three Stooges.
Yeah.
Let them be the Three Stooges that they want to be. But nobody
Yeah.
can do it because the irresistible pull of competing for the object of desire, which is power, is too irresistible for anybody to let them do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think you wrote this article on Trump as a scapegoat a couple years ago.
Right.
It was a great article. And I think it's true that, Girard talks about scapegoats being chosen among kings. He looks funny. He's got a lot of reasons to sort of, throw this pent up frustration on him. But what's going to happen now that he's gone? Well, the trial, they're going to impeach him and things like that. So that's going to occupy us for a little bit longer. So if you turn on CNN and MSNBC, they're talking about Trump still, right? And I don't know what happens though once he's gone. What happens with that aggressive energy? Because it's Girard read Freud, and Freud talks about this. When the object that all the libidinal energy is focused on disappears, it goes. This is in his essay, Freud's essay, Mourning and Melancholy. It goes back on the self. Now, if that's on the individual level, what happens on the collective level when that happens, when the scapegoat is removed? I don't know. I think it starts eating they start eating each other. I have no idea what it's going to look like.
But we can't get out of the way, and I say we as in people who don't agree with their strident, aggressive religious mission.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I'm not a conservative. I don't care about those labels, but it's like anybody who's not a part of that, for some reason, we can't leave them alone because it feels like fight or flight. What happens is they're so aggressive that people feel like, you know what? I want to be principled. I want to withdraw from the power game, but I have to because, David, you're naive. If we just allow them to run amok with power, they're going to destroy us. They're going to, censor our speech, take the gun, blah, 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 blah. We can't allow this kind of insanity. But we don't want to believe in faith in Jesus because Jesus says power made perfect in weakness. And we cannot accept that is something to do. We just can't accept it. We think it's stupid. We think it's a fool's game. We think it's a fool's errand, that Jesus was just joking, or that he didn't intend that to apply to our politics when everything about Jesus was about politics.
That is a great point. Yep. Yeah. I think you're right. And the faith issue, there's a great line when I think it's Peter in 1st or 2nd Peter, when he's talking about why you should not retaliate when you're persecuted. And he says, you have to leave it up to the one who judges justly. In other words, you have to leave this up to something higher than you, or that it's not in our power to have a revolution and change the world like that. We have to have, the kingdom of God is something different than that. What were you just saying? You also made a good point about, I lost it. I forget I'll circle back to what you were just saying there for a second. It'll come back. Anyway.
Yeah, it does that to me too.
I know what I was going to say. Yeah. So I didn't vote in this last election in 2020.
Well, you're part of the problem, right?
Yeah. Well, I can't believe it's almost worse. The kind of, flack I've received from not voting. It's almost worse. You're hated by everybody then. I had students that I just say at the beginning of class, though, I didn't vote. You can hate me if you want. They get all angry and stuff. Colleagues angry with me because I didn't vote, just very, very bizarre. But,
Well, we know why though, right? Because you didn't dip your finger in the guilt,
Yeah.
See, the whole thing is there was a crowd of people throwing stones.
Yes.
And Duane said, I'm not going to throw a stone on this issue, on this ritual. I'm not doing it. And they said, what are you doing? What are you doing? You've got to throw a stone at this team or that team. Which stone are you throwing? And you're like, I don't want to be involved in this. And they're like, but if you don't throw a stone, you're implying that we're the guilty. See, that's what they don't like. They want to create this feeling that there is a moral obfuscation which is purely undifferentiated, that we could just spread the guilt of this whole wicked system amongst pretty much everybody because we all got our hands dirty by voting for a lesser of evil. And we just can't agree on who the lesser of evil is, but at the same time, we all played the game. And when you don't play the game, that pisses off the people who depend on that moral obfuscation to feel good about their deed.
Right. And what's the game? The game is, oversimplified here, but it's scapegoating. We have to be a part of a community that hates somebody. At least that's what's going on. That's why it's very tribal and very religious in this primitive sense. Both political parties. That if you don't hate somebody, it's not good enough. There's something wrong if you're not hateful of Trump or hateful of Joe Biden or whatever it is on the left. If you refuse hatred, it's almost worse in a way. And this is Girard's insight too, that social cohesion is formed in violence and in hatred. I mean, Christianity and Judaism and Christianity are reversals of this, but that's still a powerful drive that we have, that the social bonding and the social cohesion people can have. And I think it does fulfill the hole in us that's left over by the death of God. So, Nietzsche talks about, if we have a why, we can endure any how. Well, we don't have a why anymore. And this social justice stuff, or hatred of the left, hatred of the right, it gives us some sense of purpose. I mean, it's a quick fix and it won't last, but I think it does give people, kind of meaning on tap, at least in the beginning of the whole thing. At least it because people are, nihilism is very, very powerful in America right now. And people, even if people, wouldn't say they're nihilists, I think the existential threat of it is very powerful. And that's why this stuff that's why the tensions are rising so high.
So how do we tone that temperature down?
I don't know. I have no idea. I think I don't have any other answer. I think you asked me this when I was on the radio show. What do we do? And, my answer is simply Christianity. I don't know any other way. That's what I'm thrown in with. I think that's the correct worldview. I think it's the correct philosophy. I think it's the correct morality. As far as the politics and the way to go about this, I think American values, Enlightenment values are good. They're not bad things. And I think the way America was structured is good. I think if we're getting away from this, like, for example, one of the things I'm interested now in learning is about critical race theory, because it's become so popular. And I was surprised that, so I'm reading authors like Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, and one of the things they're going after is, human rights and, basic things. We just, I can't believe people are going after this stuff.
Math is a problem.
Math too. Okay, I didn't know that. I mean,
they're saying there's an argument that math is a white supremacist construct.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard how. Okay, that's very Nietzschean, actually. I mean, Nietzsche thinks math is Christian and Platonist. The idea that there's an abstract, intelligible realm. Actually, it's postmodern as well, because any intelligibility. This is really interesting. Any intelligibility for the postmodern is ipso facto exclusive and oppressive. And so you see this so what postmodernism really is the French reception of German thinkers like Heidegger and Nietzsche. The French thinkers, now Nietzsche and Heidegger had their own business for critiquing reason. Postmodernism is just a critique of reason. But when the French receive it, they say, yeah, we're not going to critique reason like Nietzsche thinks, because Nietzsche thinks reason just destroyed itself with the death of God, or for Heideggerian reasons, which are phenomenological, which say, well, reason can't encapsulate the world. No, the French say, we're going to critique reason. And by the French, I mean Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre. We're going to critique reason because it's marginalizing. So whenever you have categories or essences of things, whenever you make distinctions, that oppresses people, right? So truth, we can't have truth, because truth is oppressive. And that's what logocentrism is, or phallogocentrism. The logos, the idea of rationality itself being phallic or masculine. And then I'm not surprised that people are saying rationality is not only phallic, but white, or whatever race that, whatever race can be scapegoated in that.
Gravity is probably going to be considered sexist pretty soon, or racist.
Yeah. And it's funny that
anything that's a boundary, I jump and I cannot keep flying. Therefore, white supremacy. Therefore, patriarchy. It's like you are angry at existence itself. You have a problem with the boundaries of existence itself, and ultimately you have a problem with death. You have death anxiety, because death is the ultimate differentiation. It's you're here and then you're not, and they don't like that, and so they're flailing around that. I hate language. I hate math. I hate gravity. I hate gender. I hate anything. I hate someone's got $1 billion and I got $1 billion minus $1. I can't stand them. You can't stand differences. You can't stand boundaries.
Yep.
And I think it has something to do with the revelation of Christianity.
Yep.
But it's a radicalization of that revelation that's trying to reinsert the pagan sacred, because I think this is something I've been trying to explain, and it's hard to articulate. So maybe, it's always a practice to try to get it out. But it's basically this idea that, Girard says that, basically when you have a sea of sameness, when people are competing and losing their sense of self, that someone can stand out arbitrarily in that sea of sameness, and they become the target of blame and sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that moment of differentiation which can be the occasion for violence and oppression, right?
Yeah.
And what the left and this whole, like you just said, the postmodern stuff, attacking boundaries, attacking truth claims. It's this visceral hatred of the moment of differentiation,
Yep.
which allows for the scapegoating to happen. But this is what the Christian says, and maybe you can correct it, is that the Christian says, yes, differentiation can be an occasion for violence, but it doesn't have to be inherently so. But
Right.
we can redeem, we can have a redeemed differentiation,
Mhm.
We can have differences in gender without screwing over one gender,
Right.
We can
Right.
have differences of wealth without screwing over the people who don't have as much. And there's this sense in which we're becoming aware of the scapegoat mechanism because of 2,000 years of the gospel's infection into our sense making, but it's just going off the rails. It's going off the rails,
You brought up something really important, and I wanted to talk about that, namely the Girard versus the postmodern theory about where violence comes from. Because, as I was saying, French reception of German philosophy is really postmodernism, and it happens after World War II. People are saying, what the hell happened after World War II? What's the cause of violence? The French answer, the postmodern answer is it's reason, that is categories of thought. It's essentialism, basically, or it's differentiation. Girard says, like you said, yeah, I mean, differences can be the cause of violence, but sameness is much more dangerous. As you break down boundaries, as you level everything out democratically. This goes back to Girard's reading of de Tocqueville, who said, you got to watch when you start toppling hierarchies, because then mediation moves from external mediation to internal mediation.
Right.
Technical terms in Girard, which means now I think I have a shot at that. And now if somebody's the same as me, they're in my way, they're my rival. And so the big thesis of Girard, and I think he's right about this, is that violence doesn't come from necessarily categorization, differentiation. It's actually sameness. And then when everything starts getting, this mimetic snowball of sameness, that's when violence gets crazy, because we start looking for anyone who's different in any way. And then that's when the scapegoating happens. So I think that's the interesting part about Girard, is that sameness is the problem here, and everything wants to be leveled out. But what's interesting too is, I just want to add this as a kind of anecdote. I was surprised that, in academia is really peppered with Marxism. It's saturated with Marxism, particularly among colleagues. Mm-hmm. And, everybody's for, the weak and the marginalized, and wants everything level, and wants, however, Girard talks about this, that you wouldn't believe the seemingly arbitrary distinctions that are made among academics. So with my colleagues, there's always ways in which you can make distinctions from, we're different from the sort of rabble. The point you were making about Walmart, that I think, strange that the left so identifies with, seemingly the poor, the orphan, the widow, whatever, but then doesn't want anything to do with them. So it's like this idea of loving humanity, but not actually human beings. And so, like, I don't know, just the kind of arbitrary ways people make distinctions, whether, what kind of beer you're drinking now. We're different because the plebs drink Coors Light and I drink craft beer, whatever nonsense it is right now.
Those are artificial differentiation. They're still trying to keep the hierarchy in place.
Exactly.
They're smuggling it in through different ways. Yeah.
Exactly. Dishonestly too. And I'm not even sure it's conscious, but they still have to keep the kind of, we're above these people, even though we vote in a way that, seemingly is in their interest, I think. And I think that's the religious aspect, that it gives people, I think people really do have this impulse. And this is the kind of maybe saving grace in the whole thing, that we have a religious impulse. And I think this religious impulse has now been channeled politically. And people think that, and it's a kind of Gnosticism where you just hold the right, beliefs and you're somehow liberated and enlightened, right? So if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican, I see it more on the left, to be honest.
Yeah.
That if we hold these basic virtues, we don't have to act anyway. We just have to think this, and then we're somehow saved.
Well, America was founded on a myth of revolutionary spirit, right? And so now there's a new revolutionary spirit that's trying to supplant the original revolutionary spirit. It's a war, 1619 versus 1776. One was the original revolutionary spirit that kind of gave us our liberalism and our Enlightenment values, and now the 1619 is saying, no, we're challenging your founding myth. Your founding myth of a social contract was a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy to suppress, and now we're going to reveal the true myth, the new founding origins of your whole society, and it was all a conspiracy of oppression, all an attempt to suppress and black out some people's voices and so forth, and just try to turn it into, it's always a black or white thing of binary. It's either good or bad. And you guys in the traditional American story, both on the left and the right, were on the same page. of the myth
Yeah.
of the founding. And
Yeah.
now we can't handle that anymore. That's got to be totally revolutionarily overthrown. And so that's what Trump was. Trump was someone who was a heretic because he firmly believed in the original story of America, that America was, he wouldn't say an exceptional nation, but the best, right? The best. It was this something that needed to be, kind of, brought back into its full glory. So I call him kind of a Nietzsche style because he wanted the winners to return. The winners of history need to reclaim their winner's energy and let's kick some tail again. So that's why he would profane the sacred status of the White House by saying, "Hey, when I'm president, we should go and get the oil from Iraq, to pay back for what we did for them." And they're like, "No, stupid, you don't say that. You don't say that. There's no romance there. You want romance. You've got to romance the people if you want to sell them on a bloody war. You can't just say outright, I want to get the oil." That's like a crass guy at the bar. Doesn't know charm, doesn't know, sophisticated language. You're just, "Oh, you want to hook up?" You can't say it like that, Donald. And that was the problem with him. It was his speech. His speech did not maintain the new myth, which is which was trying to supplant the old myth with this hyper victimism that we're here for the people and we're here for the spread of human rights in the Middle East, not to take their oil. And you're just crass and you're bringing in reality in your rhetoric because you're an amateur at statism, Donald. And that was the problem. He was a heretic that had to be purged because of his language, not his policies. His policies were pretty much the same.
That's a great point. There's a lot there. I gotta think about that for a second because you nailed it. Yeah, it's people want to be lied to. They want the persona of the president. They want Barack Obama, who's very well spoken and but is doing the same kind of things. I mean, it's the same thing with the immigration policy. Nobody cared about it when it was under Obama because he didn't say it that way. He didn't say it in a vulgar way. And I think you're right. The other thing too, though, about Donald Trump, I think, is he had a very transparent presidency. I haven't seen Biden field questions yet, from any, I'm waiting for it. When is he? Trump was doing that, too much, I think, where he told us everything he was up to. People don't want that. They want they want the president to be this kind of figurehead, and they want a hard line appearance reality distinction. And I think that's what you're getting at. We want to be deluded by appearances and to think, oops, oh yeah, we had to do that. We had to go in there, but we're really, like you said, concerned about the victims over there in the Middle East. We happen to get the oil. Oh yeah, sure. But we want that appearance reality distinction. And I think Trump tried to collapse that in a way, and it was just too much for people to bear, the reality of what American,
I mean, think about this. Given how the media makes Trump out to be a monster beyond all, now they're trying to tie him to basically be an Osama bin Laden or something, And it's like, think about this for a second. Who killed more innocent lives in their foreign policy, Donald Trump or Barack Hussein Obama? Who did? Donald John Trump, Barack Hussein Obama.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obama killed more innocent lives. Who killed more people of color overseas, Barack Obama or Donald Trump? Barack Obama. So on the standards of, think about the wars. He instigated the coup. He instigated the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
In Egypt, Tunisia, other places around the globe. He started Yemen. He helped the Yemen thing get off the ground. Barack Obama did, where they had the starvation campaign of one of the poorest countries in the region, starving people with backing up the Saudi blockade. He did he started the chaos. He helped with the Libya coup, right?
Yep. Yeah.
They armed Al Qaeda in Syria, the people who attacked us. He helped aid that. So if you look at the body count, which is the Christian standard of morality, and look, that doesn't mean Trump's the hero, but it just means if you want to get brass tacks morality, Barack Obama has a way bigger body count in foreign policy than Donald Trump. But the media doesn't make you feel that way because it's all about language constructing reality. And Donald Trump's language and his aesthetic and golden toilets does not fit victim garbed corporatism.
That's a great point. That is well said. It doesn't fit victim garbed corporatism. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's just not the language we want it couched in. Yeah, I think that's right.
But that's the same. This is where Girard's helpful. A couple things about this. One, you talked about external mediators versus internal mediators. One of the reasons why Trump ticked people off is he was tweeting in the middle of 4 a.m. with misspelled words and grammatical problems and all caps, tweeting on the toilet in the middle of the night. And what that did was, see, the president, it's like he made the presidency a dunk tank clown at the circus, at the fair.
Yeah.
And people are like, wait a second. You're supposed to be this sacred aura. Presidents are supposed to be these high priests. They're not touchable.
Yeah.
They're manicured by television, and you're over here misspelling words and attacking Rosie O'Donnell. You have profaned the high priestly role of the presidency. And so you have moved the presidency from an external mediator, an avatar that we subsume our profane reality into his mythic status, and you are lowering it closer to an internal mediator where I can get a little punch at the president of the United States on a tweet.
Exactly.
And they hated it. They hated it because he was destroying the worship of the state by doing that, because he destroyed the honor. That's why they said we got to fumigate the White House when we get him out of here, because he had made the sacred feel stinky by misspelling words and tweeting in the middle of the night about Rosie O'Donnell.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Now, and I think that was, it's interesting. There's a good thing. That was good that he did that. On the other hand, it was terrible because we do need those distinctions in place or chaos results. I mean, in a sense, in one sense, I'm glad he was not reelected, because I don't know if the country could have handled it. If he were reelected, I don't know, the country would have been on fire, I think, precisely for the reasons you're talking about. So it's not a clear answer here. I mean, it was good that he did that, though, because, maybe it's time people realize what the presidency is. And he gave people exactly what they voted for. He said what he was going to do, and he did everything he said he was going to do. And he didn't change his personality, and we can't deal with that. I mean, we need the hierarchical distinctions, I think.
Well, he turned the lights off. He turned the lights on during our favorite movie in the cinema.
Yeah.
So suddenly, all of a sudden, their suspension of disbelief was broken up for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And some people who were the edgy guys who mimetically, they're like, yeah, this is edgy. Guys, you're in a movie. And they're like, no, you guys are crazy cult worshipers of Trump.
Yeah.
And so what they wanted to do was turn that light back off so people could resume the movie and believe that the state was this Mickey Mouse enterprise that they want to make themselves out to be. Oh, we're only here to help the children. We're only here to help the oppressed.
Yep.
And like I said, Obama killed more innocent people around the globe than Trump. Obama deported more people than Trump. Obama is the one who built the cages that put kids in there. And now they call them, with Biden, the stupid media comes out and, it's now called overflow detention center. Oh, give me a break. You guys are so pathetic. We see right through it. But the cat's out of the bag. Most people are like, wait a second, you turned off the lights, but I know this is a movie now. This is a manufactured reality.
That's a great metaphor for what just happened. I don't think we can go back now. And I think it's like it's choppy or something. It's like Biden is robotic or something. It's like, what do you do? Come on. This is.
It's like you can see the special effects. That's not blood, on the movie. You're like, that's not blood. That's computer graphics. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's kind of scary when you talk about it that way. And I think you nailed it. The other thing too is Joe Biden didn't campaign. This is the weird thing. He was in the basement for most of, for the last year. Right. I think what's scary to me is that the media elected a candidate, and that, Kamala Harris too didn't get much support from the Democratic Party in the primaries. It's really weird that he, but I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of things happened in this past presidential election. I think the main one is that the Democrats outsmarted the Republicans with the mail-ins. I think they knew if they campaigned on that and they pushed the mail-ins that they would have gotten what they wanted. I don't think there was voter fraud, although I don't know. I think it was just an outsmarting. I think Trump should have, and the Republicans should have pushed that more.
Time Magazine just came out with a big story saying, there was a whole coordinated cabal to help fortify the election from Trump, and that the mail-in ballot stuff had been started before Corona. So they've even come out and done a victory lap around that they were doing the mail-in ballot rule change before Corona even was a thing.
Yeah.
So this was a nice coordinated effort to really, change the rules to make it fit their intended outcome of what they wanted. Democracy is what happens when the official people who play the game are elected. An attack on our democracy is what happens when somebody slips through the ritual, who was not invited, who was not intended to be a winner. Right. And that's why when Trump won, you had people in the Democrats in the Congress who were saying, "I'm not going to certify the election," but they weren't branded as attacks on democracy, because the media was busy spinning that xenophobic attack against that this was Trump wasn't elected, it was a hack by the Russians. and they let that word, that dubious word of hack, they would say, well, we're not saying that they actually hacked the election machines. That would be too much of a scary sacred attack on our elections. We're just saying they hacked it by buying like $5,000 of Facebook ads or something, and that somehow tipped the election for Trump against Hillary. But see, they put that meme in there that when someone who is unauthorized to hold the holy seat of power is in, there's an invasion, there's a foreign boogeyman. And that's to let you know that the ritual did not go as intended.
Yeah.
A Bush and a Clinton was not elected, so this is not, we had to let you feel that there's a foreign contamination, just like it would be in an ancient ritual. There's a foreign contamination. Someone has profaned the ritual. This is not an effective sacrifice. We're going to have to redo this, and that's how, that's the idea, is that you did not chant the right holy written text or something when you perform the ritual. So therefore, this is not the way it's supposed to be, folks. Stand by. We'll be back in 40 years. Don't worry,
Right. So what do you think then? I'm interested because, I can't tell what you're saying, what you're implying, because I think, do you think then that it was ultimately a bad thing or a disastrous thing or a chaotic thing that Trump was elected because of the things you're talking about, the fact that he gets in there and breaks the holy, profanes the sacred? The country couldn't handle it. Like the tensions were high, and or is he just a symptom of something that was already happening anyway? I mean, this stuff was going on.
Well, I think it correlates with the rise of the digital age. I think that.
Yeah.
See, I'm trying to work on figuring out. I'm working on trying to figure out how to integrate Marshall McLuhan's work about media ecology and how it shapes the human species, and Girard. So I'm trying to figure out. I've been working on it. Tinkering with these things.
Oh, yeah. Okay, this isn't. So the only person I've heard say something like this, I think, was Candace Owens, and it never really got legs. But she mentioned it. I can't remember, maybe two years ago on this, and I was thinking the same thing. That part of the reason why Trump got elected, and part of the reason why the sacred was profaned, is because it's already been being profaned. Now that we have, the digital age and social media, where now everybody has an opinion, the distinction between the public and the private is completely dissolved. Now, Hannah Arendt talked about this in The Human Condition. She called it the rise of the social, where the public and private started to blend together. And she talked about this, 60, 70 years ago, 50 years ago, I guess. And I think people just are calling bullshit now on, okay, people don't act like that. And you notice too, as things get more and more politically correct or more woke, and whatever the connection is between those two, like you were saying earlier, the image of what an individual, or the ideal of what a person looks like, the paragon of virtue is so unrealistic. Someone that's never misspoke, even in high school, or someone who's never, someone who is so squeaky clean. It's ridiculous. And I think most people don't speak like that. Most people don't think like that. It's a complete denial of humanity, I think. When the public and the private, now, I mean, I understand that distinction was important because we had the private and people would curse and do all kinds of things. And then in the public, they would present this image, but it's like, we can't sort of decide which we want. Do we want the collapse? Do we want the private to be the public, or do we want that distinction again? And I think Trump was a little too scary. Yeah.
Right. And this idea that with media ecology, that the digital age brings about this phenomenon where everybody has access to an internet connected phone, that not only that, but it gets capable of high quality audio recording and HD video streaming. So now you've got broadcasters by the billions potentially. And so what happens is the human, and this is hard for me to put into words, so I'm just going to have to try to make an image, is like the human species, it used to have these monocultural media sense-making machines, right? You have, go back long enough, you've got the myth makers, the priestly cast, the scribal cast, and then it gets broken up with newspapers, or then you get the telegram, then you get the radio and the broadcast, and every time there's this, it's a decentralization and then a centralization, because radio gets into the hands of a few people. TV, it's centralized into the hands of a few TV companies, thanks in part to the FCC. And then all of a sudden the internet comes along, and then technology comes about to make the internet in your pocket. And not only that, but to video stream, so you can see clearly when there's a police misconduct, or you can see clearly when there's a bad word by a politician or something. And now everybody, so it's like this blob of humanity is all of a sudden seeing all of its imperfections by a billion little mirrors. And it's like, ooh, that's ugly. Ooh, that's ugly. So it's like this blob. This is the human species. It's like a collective mind for a second. And all of a sudden, this digital age brings about like billions of little mirrors. And now all of our flaws are just bothering the snot out of us, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what this woke stuff is and all this stuff is about, is because we're like, whoa, 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 racist. Whoa, 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 sexist. Whoa, 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 whoa. Wait, there's 70% of people in engineering departments are male. Oh my God, it's a disaster. We have to make it 50-50.
Right.
You know, everything has to be perfect. And it's like this obsession with rooting out every differentiation, which is the moles of our collective species. We can't have any blemishes, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what's happening, is that we're losing our mind. And that's why a heretic like Trump can emerge in that context, because we can't be bound together by a more manicured monocultural perspective. You know, when Jesus, and this is because of Jesus, because the gospel stories take the camera of history away from the oppressors and puts it in the hand of the victim. And so that opens up the opportunity to innovate and create technology instead of sacrifice to solve problems. And as that technology develops and evolves, the ways in which the gospel will haunt cultures becomes more increasingly intense. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's this relationship between media evolution and the ability of the gospel to permeate the consciences of the populations that it's percolating in, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's why we're in this weird mess where everything is, they're trying to batten down the hatches, or so that, you know, whatever that word is, they're trying to clamp it down and say unauthorized, delete this person, delete that person, take this Twitter down, take Parler down, take this down. They're trying to control, because they're trying to keep that TV era mentality back. They're trying to revivify that TV, you know, control of reality back in, and it's just not going to work. Because the more they scapegoat people's voices, the more it creates that martyr's energy, what people call the Streisand effect, but what Girard would call the intelligence of the victim, which is, wait a second, even if someone was a freak or a bad person in terms of bad ideologies, it creates energy to look at them when you ban them.
Yeah, that's right.
Because Christ was crucified outside the camp, and ever since then, we're haunted by the idea, if you take someone outside the camp and say not allowed, we're excited to go see what it looks like, because we're haunted by the idea that, you know, Christ is among us, so to speak, that there's this, that the power is found outside the camp. So when you ban people, it backfires, and it makes people who have bad ideas have a better hearing.
That's a great point. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's interesting too. There's a lot. You said a lot there. I mean, you know, I don't know where to begin, but, you know, just going back to the kind of change you're talking about, this paradigm shift that happened with technology. It's kind of like the analogy. The last time something like this happened was the Reformation, where the printing press came about and everybody was literate all of a sudden and reading the scriptures for themselves. You look at the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. It really is a illiterate culture, right, versus a literate culture. And the whole thing changes. You have people in big hats reading books, and they're, you know, then all of a sudden everybody can read it. Totally changes everything. Now with the smartphone, there's something like that again. You know, there's I think he's a Jesuit philosopher named Walter Ong, and he talks about the differences between a written culture or a literate culture and an oral culture. You know, and the hierarchy is maintained much better in an illiterate culture, because there's distinctions. Once you have the printing press, you know, hierarchy sort of gets dissolved in the Protestant church because everybody can read it. Now, this is another kind of dissolution of differences and hierarchy, again, with this digital age, like what you were talking about, where there's all these, you know, people can record everything. You have access to everything. Everybody has a voice. This is changing probably the brain in ways that we're not even going to be aware of for, you know, hundreds of years from now. The kind of, you know, bombshell the digital age brought in, I think. But you're absolutely right, too, about what you're saying about the victim outside the camp, and, you know, the voice that's given to the marginalized, however, even if they're marginalized for being marginal or for marginalizing themselves.
Or if they're a bad guy with bad ideology, you know,
I mean,
it creates martyr. I call it martyr's energy, or a martyr's purge. Everybody wants the martyr's purge.
Yep.
And when they call it the cathedral, some people, or they call it the, you know, I call it victimism, like Girard does, or whatever you want to call this neoliberal corporatism, which is the establishment narrative. Every time they say, hey, expel Parler, people are like, hey, why? Wait a second. What is it about Parler? And because we're haunted by the cross. The cross is this story that is just breaking our imagination and breaking our conscience, breaking our heart. And so whenever we see something expelled, we say, was that Charles Manson, or was it a Christ? Right? And we're suspicious of the narratives of expulsion now. This is exactly what Jesus said would happen. He said, mother will hate daughter and daughter will hate this. Your unity is going to fall apart because you're going to understand part of what I'm doing, but you won't want to repent of the violence. And that's where we're at today, because we're haunted by our violence, you know?
Yeah.
People that vote for Biden, they knowingly voted for a man with 50 years of locking up people of color for his own political gain, and that bothers them in their heart. It bothers them on a visceral, subconscious level. It bothers them because they know that they're partaking and perpetuating the same oppressive behaviors that have happened for so long. But they have to quarantine that guilt. They have to say, but I'm doing it in the name of protecting the man who says horrible things. And here's where Girard comes back, because it's all about words. And like you said, this postmodern obsession with language constructing reality, this is just an evolution of myth. Because myth was this idea that if we tell the story, it justifies violence. The symbol hides the violence, right? And so today, our postmodern language codes are that vestige, a broken vestige, a Christ-haunted vestige, but a vestige of trying to contain the reality of vulgar violence within language. And so before, you would say, we got to rip the heart out of this peasant because Odin demands it. Let's do the priestly thing. Here comes the priest. Bam, there goes the heart. It's okay. It's okay. Don't get upset. It's what Odin demands. No, it's what the crowd demands, and you projected it into the sky and called it Odin. And the same for now. Oh, we have to protect democracy from Trump. Well, that's language. All you're doing is putting symbols out. And all you're doing is justifying allowing the same crooks to hurt and oppress innocent people, but you did it because Odin demands you to do it because a monster will get you if you don't. This is the same crap. It's just now desacralized. You know?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot there again, man. One of the things that's interesting about postmodernism is the attack on science, and because it comes with an attack on reason, attack on the idea that the world isn't ordered in a particular way. And one of the things Girard and Nietzsche both agree on is that looking in nature for intelligibility and causality is a Christian idea. It comes from Girard has the idea that once we stop blaming people for causing the plague or doing this, we can begin to do science. Nietzsche thinks looking at the world as if it's designed, as if it's intelligible, as if it's ordered, is a Christian idea. And the strange thing is, for Nietzsche, the bizarre thing is that the will to truth in science led to Darwin and led to all the innovations of modern science, which led to the death of God. And so it's interesting. Maybe 10 years ago, remember when? Now you don't even hear these guys. They're on the other side. Dawkins, Hitchens is dead. Sam Harris, these guys, the new atheists, they were big maybe 10 years ago. Now these guys are on the other side because the idea, scientific people are over science now. They're over this idea. They don't give a shit what science has to say if it doesn't fit what you're talking about, if it doesn't fit the myth. And because we're very much committed to this idea that language constructs reality in the mythical way you're talking about. It's an excellent observation, I think.
What do you mean that Dawkins is over science? I mean, I know. What do you mean? Flesh that out. No, those types like that.
I just mean when the world was much stabler back then, 10 years ago, whereas people were really.
We didn't have smartphones yet. We still had flip phones.
Right. Whereas people were interested in evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology, all these things, things that categorize the world and make distinctions. Now, I mean, if you look at the science on some of the stuff you're talking about, like there's research for the last 70 years or something about the differences between men and women, right, in personality and what accounts for disparities in STEM and things like this. But nobody wants to talk about that. The biology is really at odds with the morality, at least right now. I got to be careful about what I say here because somebody will rip one of this off and then it'll be on repeat. But what I'm saying is that when we're given a choice between whether we have science on the one hand and then our concern for victims and wokeism on the other, we always side with the morality, not the science. So it's crazy about when people are talking about we're seeing it now too with COVID and the way science can pretty much be used. You can make things say whatever you want. People are saying hydroxychloroquine works and they're saying it doesn't. Masks don't work. Masks work. You can make, science is also kind of detached from its secure footing and it just starts floating off because people who say, well, I'm for science. What does that even mean? It means you're for a certain interpretation of a certain interpretation.
Right. So science became a religion in the modern age and the postmodern digital age is desacralizing that religion.
Exactly what I'm saying. And that happened in the last, I don't know, 8 years, right?
Yeah, I mean,
10 years ago. Yeah, science was the religion 10 years ago. Now it's like, oh, that we're over that. Science, yeah.
When I was in college, go ahead.
Yeah.
What's that?
I was going to say science is exclusive. People who are for science it's the same thing. The categories of thought end up victimizing.
Because we thought we could create an objective transcendent science, and now we're realizing, oh, this is messy.
Yeah. Sorry, you were going to say.
Well, when I was in college back, I remember taking these classes with I was in a communication field, and I remember taking all these, the social construct, theory, critical theory classes, gender identity and women identity, all this stuff. And I always liked taking those classes because those were easy as pie. It was me and the football players, and then everybody else was social justice soldiers in the class. And we would just have fun because all you had to do is sing Kumbaya and get an A, I like those classes. Right. But I'd take those classes and, everything was all about, you can socially construct whatever truth you find out of it. So I argued that Lion King was a story about a female lion cub that transitioned into a male lion cub and realized his true potential when he became the king. And they gave me an A for that. They thought that was fantastic. And half the class knew I was trolling the professor, but the professor had no ability to critique it because he had already made the premise of the class that you can socially construct whatever meaning you need out of these texts. So it was so fun. But the thing that I kept thinking is, I think that I kept saying, they're trying to do this tabula rasa stuff, right? This whole social construction thing. But I kept thinking Darwin is like this pit bull. And they need Darwin. They needed Darwin to overthrow the Christian frame. But it's this nasty pit bull that's going to come back and just tear the hell out of the tabula rasa concept that they're trying to build. Now, does that make me, you're a philosopher, you see anything there? Like that's something that's going to happen? Or is the tabula rasa critical theory stuff going to kill Darwin in the process? You know what I mean?
Well, I think it is killing Darwin now. And for the reasons,
interesting.
It's interesting. Nietzsche is really the first postmodern, but people disagree with Nietzsche because so Nietzsche says, all right, it's all about power, right? And power bifurcates into strong and weak. And there's no reason to side with weakness other than 2,000 years of catechesis and Christianity. To hell with it. We got to go with a kind of social Darwinism where we affirm strength. The interesting thing, though, is that people don't see what's implied in Nietzsche is a kind of hierarchy in nature. And a kind of hierarchy in the animal kingdom, that there are distinctions in nature. I mean, Nietzsche would say, look, there are some people, nature naturally does this. It just biologically determines to some extent, some people are better looking, some people are more athletic, some people are smarter, some people are more clever. This is just, it's not all social, and Nietzsche thinks that nature is really unequal. And what his critique of Christianity is, now when he's critiquing Christianity, I think he's critiquing a sort of bastardized version of it that you coincidentally find in leftism now, but it's the idea that wants to abolish all differences because we don't like that there's inequality in nature. Right. And the problem with Darwinism is that you have to affirm inequality in nature. So I'm watching I got all, Discovery Plus, Disney Plus, all these things, and there's nature documentaries on there. And we're watching, what is it? Like, I don't know, some nature documentary where this mother bird just lets the other young one, it has two, little birds, and the mother lets the one die off.
Yeah,
it's not strong. It's like, holy shit, they're showing this now. Nature is brutal. Nature, there's inequality shot through in nature, but we think it stops with us, and we think, no, nature can't be like that. That's because of capitalism that you have inequality. That's bullshit. There's been inequality. Inequality is shot through in nature. And, this idea of wanting to make all things
equal. That bird
equal.
Is a fascist. That mother bird is a fascist.
People have no idea. There's a great book that just came out, and it's in the vein of Rodney Stark, but it's by Tom Holland. You ever hear of it, Dominion?
I had Tom Holland on the show a little bit ago.
Oh, did you? Okay, yeah, it's a fantastic book. I mean, if you just skip to the section on charity, where he just shows that, look, this idea of caring about weak people is pretty new in the world,
Right.
Like, anyway, the interesting thing is that I think the left recognizes now that if they go too hard on science, they're going to have to admit of some inequality in nature, not inequality in dignity necessarily, because that's a metaphysical concept, but at least inequality. And this is why we're seeing the leveling down of even, was it you? Where did I read about this? Where they're getting rid of SAT scores now, and they're getting rid of distinctions and everything. Everybody gets a trophy on every level because we can't admit of difference, even though. So in other words, it's an attack on nature, I think. And I think that when we attack nature, there's something connected to this, to the death of God. because we don't want to admit that the world is designed, or we don't want to admit that the world is ordered, or at least in any way whatsoever. Yeah.
And you know, and what's interesting is Christianity has kind of a common, this is so weird, but it has kind of a common ally in some sense with Darwinism.
Absolutely.
Because we both recognize that there is an inequality to nature. We just have different origins for how that happened intrinsically. You know, the Christian might have Darwinism in it, but fundamentally it's about that something happened in nature that made us fall, that made the world fall. And Darwin doesn't give that account. He just says, no, nature intrinsically has this kind of dog-eat-dog framework that produces inequality, and we shouldn't make moral judgments about it. Now, Christianity does make a moral judgment about it, which makes wokeism such a nice, convenient little ripoff of Christianity, because, you know, Christianity has a problem with the disordered nature of the way things work out. That a tiger has to tear apart an animal, that African dogs have to rip out the intestines of a gazelle live. That's vicious. What kind of a God would create such a horrible world? You know, and so what do? We have to scapegoat, and that's what the wokeism says: is no. The gazelle rips out. You know, they haven't gotten to this point, but they will. The gazelle rips out. I mean, the jackals rip out the gazelle's intestine while he's alive because of white supremacy. I'm sorry, this is the reality of it. It's like, no, sir, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But see, I implied their gender by saying sir, so I can't do that, right? I can't assume that, because they want to attack differentiation. So here's the thing, Duane, is that to me, it's this whole radical attack on differentiation that postmodernism provides, that this left stuff, this woke left stuff provides. To me, it feels like it is a real time, almost a real time proof of the mimetic theory of Rene.
Absolutely.
Because and it's scary to me, because I'm like, it makes me feel like Girard was more accurate on the nose in some ways than he even knew.
I think so.
Why is it? You know, because he said that the gospel would reveal the scapegoat mechanism. And it seems like we're in this transitionary phase where our leftist sensibilities that dominates Western culture is haunted by victimization, but they are haunted and they desire to scapegoat differentiation. So it's in a transition phase where the real answer is protect the human person and renounce collective violence in all of its forms, but we're not there yet.
No.
We're at this halfway transitionary fossil stage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We want to attack the differentiation, and it makes me feel like, good Lord, how could Girard's theory be so right on the nose here?
Well, it's interesting. Exactly. Well, what's interesting is, and this has always boggled me, and tell what you're saying now, I think connects this for me. Why is it that, you know, when I'm talking to someone on the left or on the right, or on the left, let's say, that I can't just say I'm against racism, but I don't accept the metaphysics that you're saying, that critical race theory is true, or that everybody's a racist, or that, there's systemic racism, things like this, the metaphysics that go with that. Why isn't it enough that we can agree on the ethics? Why can't I say, of course I'm against white supremacy, or the idea that one race is better? I'm against racism. That's considered racist unless you accept the metaphysics of it, because the metaphysics, in that particular sense, denies the differentiation you're talking about, if that makes sense. So there's a metaphysical bag. You have to connect the metaphysics. It's really weird. Like, for example, with Black Lives Matter or something like that, people will say, of course I'm against police brutality toward African Americans. Of course I'm against this. Of course I'm against that. But the idea that this is a slogan, the idea that, okay, Black Lives Matter is the expediency of that political slogan may be one thing. But of course, when someone's, the kind of revulsion people have of saying all lives matter. Now, I'm not saying that one is better than the other in a political sense, but if you can't even say all lives matter as a philosophical claim, then that's sort of ridiculous, because of course all lives matter too. You know what I mean? But you can't even say that because people are so wary of, you're not accepting the right metaphysics along with that, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so I'm against racism. I'm against police brutality toward African Americans. However, I don't know that I buy the postmodern ideology. Why do I have to swallow the postmodern metaphysics and the postmodern ideology along with the morality? I agree with the morality. The morality against victimization is Christian, and I'm a Christian, if that makes sense.
And ultimately, though, they are institutionalizing a white supremacy framework by which old dead white Europeans are the ones that you can only think your thoughts through their prism, which is kind of a white supremacist framework to begin with, right? These postmodern, you can only accept oppression issues through the frame of dead old white Europeans. So that is a
Right.
kind of a supremacy of what as well, because you're
Right.
saying if you want to be authentically in the black community, you have to accept these postmodern dead old white Europeans' frame of reality. This is where we get critical theory derived from.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are holding supreme, and you're
Right.
forcing everybody else of all different backgrounds to be subsumed and submit their minds and their mouths to their old ideas and their old hegemonic frameworks that are now becoming more and more powerful, right?
Right.
That's a form
Why
of
do we?
supremacy, isn't it?
Absolutely, because it relies too heavily, in my opinion, on tribalism and that kind of and identity politics. And I just
Yeah.
don't agree. I mean, again, this goes back to postmodernism. The world is understood in terms of power, and power bifurcates into groups. You know, you have groups strong and weak, and that's
Mhm.
tribalism in a certain sense, or it's not too far from tribalism. I just don't accept that metaphysics. I
Right.
agree with some of the ethics, but of course, most people would agree with the ethics. That no, you know, I don't know. I've never encountered anybody.
But their
Even on
ethics
the
are
left.
not really their ethics. They always go for vengeance. They don't even go for
Well, that
reconciliation or kindness or mercy or forgiveness. It's all
right.
about vengeance. So their ethics are
Oh,
awful too. At least
that's a good
the
point. Yeah,
ones who are honest about it. You
yeah,
know, they
yeah.
don't. They
No,
want equity. Equity means you've got to put punishment on you. You can't just be equal. You can't just make uh, you know two people can't just make $50 an hour each.
mhm,
You got to go down to $25 while this person gets 50.
right,
That's the
right.
idea, is that you need to pay, you need to have payment because people who look like you did things that were bad.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and there's a truth to this, right? Because there is, my friend John was saying this the other day, is that there is a truth to the left critique that when you have these oppressive institutions of segregation and slavery, these different things, that there are psychological wounds and pain that are baked into collective identities
absolutely.
generations afterwards. We can recognize that, and that's the mistake that conservatives and conservative Inc. tend to make, is that
Hmm.
they don't acknowledge that there is a kind of collective carry through of the
Of course.
pain and psychological trauma that comes with these identities, and being told that yes, my ancestors were treated that way, and
Hmm.
I look like them, and you can see it built into as an afterglow of that. Yes. And
Right,
so see that's what I'm saying. And it's kind of with your thought that we can have that conversation,
right,
but we
right.
don't
Exactly.
have to root it in a quest for vengeance.
Right.
And that's
Exactly.
where they
Exactly.
can't go with us. They can't let us have that Christian, let's have mercy and reconciliation. Let's have grace, you know,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
they want to
Yeah.
artificially construct history in a way in which, you are irredeemably oppressor. But tell that to my ancestors who were Polish, who were being enslaved by North African pirates.
Right.
They weren't
This.
always irredeemably oppressors. It's bullcrap. It's
Right.
stupid mythology. And you know what it's all about? It's all about hiding the guilt of humanity for the scapegoat mechanism. We have to quarantine it into this institution, not
Well said.
into the human heart.
That's well said. Exactly that last line, because that's essentially the upshot of the first essay in Nietzsche's genealogy, is that human beings are cruel beings and they hide it under these guises of justice. And
Right.
what is, I mean, when you mete out justice and you take
Right.
pleasure in hurting another person, that's cruelty. If you're taking pleasure in causing another person pain, that's the definition of cruelty. And if
Right.
we case it in, well, that person's a victimizer, and we can exculpate ourselves from having to bear the guilt of what you're talking about. Exactly. But you're right, absolutely. That's where I part ways on the vengeance and the punishment and the kind of like the idea that now what's interesting too, Nietzsche has a great psychological observation. I don't know what you want to do with this, but he thinks that hatred has its root in weakness. It has biologically, we feel threatened. People are feeling threatened. They feel weak, and so they hate. And this is why
Is
Nietzsche
that
was
where he
against
gets
hate.
that resentment, or how do you say
Yeah,
that?
resentment. Yeah, exactly. Resentment or ressentiment, because the German didn't have that kind of refeeling where we hold on to it, because this is why Nietzsche was against hatred, because it just kept you in a perpetual state of weakness. And this is why he hated Christianity, hated in equivocal sense, obviously, hated Christianity because he thought it made people continually resentful, and he didn't understand that there was something like real agape or real mercy or real compassion. But his critique of Christianity is a great critique, I think, of a false sense of Christianity that we happen to find in Marxism, which is or in postmodernism, which is a kind of neo-Marxism, which takes that victim ethic, weaponizes it, and uses it for vengeance. And it's the fault, I think Jordan Peterson talked about this as well, and Nietzsche too, that there's a kind of the biological root of this kind of compassion is the mother-infant dyad. And, everyone knows what happens when you get between a mother bear and her cubs. She tears you apart. And so that's the danger of putting compassion and mercy as the highest virtue without the Christian scaffolding, because you wind up in vengeance and violence. That's why Christianity only works is if you turn the other cheek, if you let yourself be crucified.
Right. That's what the left, but the left is trying to position themselves as gods who, like the mother bear god, will protect all of its little cubs who've been picked on. So they're trying to turn other races into their children. Like, don't you pick on my child. It's like, that's not your child. Get your hands off, you freak. You know what I mean? These are sovereign individuals. In the name of God, get your nasty, grubby hands off this sovereign adult. That's what I'm tired of this left crap for, because they're so freaking arrogant and they're so freaking self-righteous in the way they treat other people of different races. Like, you're my little children. Get your freaking grubby, overreaching, overbearing, little arrogant mindset off of other people and their experiences. And they want to, and they're nastiest to people from like Black community who don't subscribe to their ideology. It's like, for example, if you're a person who is a Black person who is outspoken about libertarianism or independent political thought or mild, moderate liberalism or whatever, you are anathema to them. They will treat you with the most vitriolic hatred ever because they can't handle it. It's like you're like it's like the equivalent of the old times, ancient times, where someone comes about and they're a trickster. And it's like, what is this spooky demon who's entered into the tribe? He looks sacred, but there's a trick. They're trying to profane the temple. We can only have the voice of Herbert Marcuse or, Foucault speaking from the Black voice. And it's like, well, they're not speaking out of that voice, are they? And they can't freaking handle that. So they have to vilify people who get off the reservation of their ideology, right? They vilify them the most because they're like a trickster. They're like, they're a scapegoat that has to be purged because they violate their entire sense of religion. Because their whole religion is these identities must subsume their identities under the hegemony of dead old white people. That's the heart of the left. Herbert Marcuse, right? Foucault, all these people, and you can correct me if I'm using these names inaccurately, but these are the heart and soul of some of these critical theory ideas. And they're saying it's not enough that you quote Martin Luther King and say a colorblind society. You need to subsume your mind to dead old white people if you're going to be a Black person. That's what the left's all about. And that is a form of white supremacy, if you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
because they're saying you cannot articulate your voice as a Black person unless you submit to the mental constructs of white people who we take our critical theory ideas from.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the strange thing is, I got into reading some and listening to Black conservatives because I thought, well, okay, I'm going to take seriously this idea that we need to listen to Black voices and African American voices, and there are plenty on both sides. And I want to see what they have to say. So what I do in my postmodernism class is I put these thinkers in dialogues. Listen to them. Actually, this strange. We've lost the virtue of listening and talking to people we disagree with. And I don't even think the strange thing is the left hasn't even listened to people on the right who have different ideas, like Thomas Sowell, Larry Elder, Candace Owen. These are very intelligent people, and they have something to say. And by the very standard of we need to listen to the other's voice, or we need to listen to the oppressed voice. Well, let's see what they have to say. Or are they thinking that all people of a certain race or all people of a certain gender think alike, which is absurd. There's much more difference within a group than between groups, strangely. So I mean, there's a lot of different voices,
and that's why they tried to, these people who say they're all about, protecting people from being otherized. Well, they sure do otherize voices like Zora Neale Hurston. She used to be, an icon of literature. She probably still is in some circles in high schools across America, but she's become problematic because she was an African American woman who was identified as a libertarian and politically incorrect. You know what I mean? So she's like kind of, let's kind of like forget about those voices. Oh yeah, because it's convenient because it doesn't give you power, which is what they want. They want power. And if this voice doesn't give us power, throw them out the door. They're done.
Yeah.
Or we'll manicure and put them in a box so that you can kind of read some of her literature, but in a safety box, so you don't get it contaminating you to make you think outside of our religion. But I want to land the plane here. I'm going to ask you again, and you don't have to give me a perfect answer because it's something we have to think out loud about. How do we deal with this revelation of this religiosity that we see coming? And it is on the right too, because there is the cult of Trump and the cult of nationalism as a reaction to this internationalism, and those things are a problem too. But ultimately, I think it's clear that the neoliberal left or the corporatist left is in the driver's seat of our culture, but it's falling apart fast. And we need to be able to speak in the public square about peaceful, nonviolent solutions to this politicization of everything. And I happen to think that it involves, this is just my swing at it, one, we need to innovate. We need to create innovations in the world of the physical world to alleviate the effects of scarcity. So that people, because scapegoats are hunted when people feel that there's a crisis. And if people don't feel like there's an ability to have an expanding pie, they're more likely to look to scapegoat a person, a politician, a nation with a war, or a people group who have been oppressors or whatever. And so we have to create abundance and wealth in the physical world, not just digital websites. And the second, Peter Thiel is known for saying that we need to innovate in the world of atoms, not just the world of bits, to alleviate the effects of scarcity so that we lessen the temperature for boiled hot scapegoating energy. And number two, this is my stab at it, is that we need to tell the victim stories. Because that's what the Gospels do. The Gospels do that. The Gospels tell the story of Jesus persecuted, and they tells the story of Stephen persecuted, and it tells the story of Paul persecuted and other people persecuted, and it allows the victim story to soften the hearts of those who read the story or hear the story read. And that has an ability to get us to say, hey, let's not have vengeance. Let's truly renounce violence. Let's have mercy. Let's have reconciliation. Let's acknowledge the pain. Let's acknowledge the injustices. Some of it is social, but some of it is intrinsic. Sometimes accidents happen and we get burned. And if I was disfigured with the burn, that's a horrible thing because that will hurt my ability to connect with people who will treat me as an other. And that's what Christianity does, is we acknowledge in solidarity that exists.
Right.
But we cannot then say, let's burn other people as a vengeance to balance out the equity of my burnt face in relationship to my neighbor who has other advantages because their face wasn't burned in a fire. You see? And that's where Christianity has to come in.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like exactly.
Well,
just give pictures.
Yeah, I think you're right that this is what the left and wokeism and social justice get right, namely God is with the victim. He's with the weak. That's the perspective God took on, and that is the true perspective. However, when you divorce that, like we've been saying, from Christianity, it becomes murderous. And this is the thing. This is why the right, it's so much easier to criticize the right because they're so obvious when they go off the rails, like storming the Capitol or whatever. This is nuts. That kind of stuff is obviously nuts. But the danger, I think, and this is about 5 years ago for me, I started to see the dangers on the left being more dangerous because they're so, they obfuscate and they're so hidden and it's hard to see it. So, I mean, every cure for the problem has to have a diagnosis. We have to know what we're curing, right? And we have to know what the origin of that is. And I think understanding the connection that the left and the right have to Christianity and the origins of Western culture and what Western culture is and how it is so Christian, I think is really the beginning. What I keep hammering in all my classes is please recognize, I tell the students that I understand you're all for social justice. So am I. I'm a Christian. But understand that is an arbitrary choice that we've made because we're Christians and because of the metaphysics that we should side with weakness rather than strength. And that is the absolute value. I get this from Rene Girard. Says it at the end of the Satan book. I see Satan fall like lightning, the chapter on concern for victims and our twofold Nietzschean heritage. He says, look, this is the absolute value now, the concern for victims. But where is that value coming from? It's a Christian value. And when you recognize the choice for that is completely arbitrary, or the idea that human dignity is real, that's a metaphysical concept, that there is a religious sentiment behind this morality and stuff like that, then I think you can begin to deconstruct that deconstruction that happens on the left and tie it back to Christianity. So my cure is nothing new. I have no secret cure for this other than that people need to pray more. They need to be more Christian. They need to come back to our roots in Western culture, because the fragmenting happened with the death of God and with the collapse of Christianity. Now, what that's going to look like, I don't know, but I think it has to be a return to the church. I don't agree, or I'm not convinced by a lot of Christian authors like Alistair McIntyre talk about the Benedict option, where people just form these small, kind of underground communities and things like that. I don't know. Maybe that'll work. I know people are doing it. I worry that just increases tribalism and just increases us versus them. I think people just need to be more outspoken about Christianity, like Dr. King, and be nonviolent.
And apply it, and don't be afraid to truly actually apply it to political stuff, because that's where everybody gets messed up.
Right.
That's the thing. None of this stuff, it goes back to, none of this woke stuff would be here if the conservative Christian churches, the traditional Christian churches, had not become so wedded to empire in the first place. They embraced war. They embraced the Iraq War. The moral majority wanted to have a seat at the king's table. They wanted to be a power negotiator. And so they didn't represent the voice of the prophetic voice of the Lamb. And so therefore, people looked outside of the church for a voice of the Lamb, and they got it in new churches. And that's what's happening.
That is so well said. I mean, I broke with the Republican Party in early 2000s because of the Iraq War, and I was a Democrat since then. And then the Democrats started getting nuts about 5-6 years ago. You're exactly right. I think you nailed it. I think people were sick of the hypocrisy on in Christianity. This Constantine Christianity of embracing empire.
Pro-police without any option for listening to the voice of the marginalized, the ones who have been locked in prison for nonviolent crimes for their whole life. That's my antidote for the wokeism, is say, no, we're going to tell the victim story, but it's always going to be seasoned with the message of love, nonviolence. That means no initiation of aggression and no initiation of vengeance. Self-defense, but on an individual level.
Yeah.
I know that's tricky, because Girard says if you allow for self-defense, it always becomes a justification to initiate violence, because you can always say stuff like, well, language is violence, so therefore I can hit you because you're a Nazi because you said, I'm not for the freaking mass bomber Joe Biden or something. And they're like, what are you doing? It's weird. And so, it's tricky to even allow for some caveat like self-defense. But I do think that's the protection of differentiation, which is that you don't have a right to create this kind of pacifism by law in which people can be murdered or assaulted and there's no police to protect, or no self-defense mechanism for real physical violence. But the problem is that the state goes way beyond that and becomes an instrument of preemptive violence, preemptive coercion. So we're going to prevent you from using this drug because you could get high and break into someone's house. So we're going to lock everybody up and destroy families for generations. Or we're going to preempt you from selling raw milk because someone could get sick and who's got an immune compromisation and therefore they die. So therefore we're going to ban raw milk. And these little things, this baked in coercion into our society, it haunts us. It haunts us, and it makes us callous, and it makes us antisocial, and it makes us feel like, well, a mixture of being oppressed and being an oppressor. And so we're constantly trying to channel it into a church setting. And you go to the house of the church, you go to the house of Jesus, and you don't get anything from Jesus oftentimes. I mean, you do. I don't want to take away from it, but no one's talking about the anthropology of the Bible. And Jesus said he's the Son of Man more than he said he's the Son of God, which means we should be learning about how the Bible helps us see what humanity is all about. Why do we have conflict? Why do we have scapegoating? Why do we have envy? You should learn that in the church. You shouldn't just hear the theology of Jesus. That's why we have a disembodied church. That's why we have a church that says, yes, I'm for Jesus, but we're going to go to the Iraq War. That's not gospel. That's another gospel. And it has produced this mutant child, this angry child called wokeism, which is crying out for vengeance, and that's where we're at, and we've got to be able to heal it. We've got to be able to heal the situation.
I mean, the one thing that Jesus laced in the prayer he gave us is forgive other people. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. This is the most important thing, is what you're talking about, is forgiveness. And forgiveness gets rid. It's nonviolent. It gets rid of vengeance. And it's still unpopular. Loving your enemy is still unpopular.
Well, Professor Armitage, it's been a pleasure having you on. Do you have that other book that you've got coming out? Can we see that?
No, I don't have a copy of it.
Tell us the title.
It's called Philosophy's Violence Sacred. It's with Michigan State University Press, the series of Mimetic Theory. People, if they're a member of Cover, already are getting it, but I didn't get a copy of it yet. And it comes out in April. But you just type in Duane Armitage in Amazon, and it comes up. And along with these baby books. They're a good gift for children.
Yeah.
So big
Well,
ideas
hey,
for Little Philosophers.
yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing. This is a lot of fun. I think a lot of
Yeah,
people are going to enjoy this,
I
because
enjoyed
these are
myself. Yeah.
these are great themes that we need to be chewing on a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I have to
Figure
go.
these
I'll have to
things.
go back and listen to this because you had a lot packed in there and what you were saying. So I only got to address maybe 10% of it because there was a lot of insights there.
Well,
Thank you.
again, I really appreciate you coming on, and it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Okay. Take care.